Welcome to Wild Notes webinar Lunch and Learn. We got a ton of puppy love going on at Wild Note right now. Rini Punzi adopted this beautiful Weimar doodle. And she's a sweetie. And I adopted this well, I thought she was a Kelpie, but she's a border collie in Kelpie costume. So she tricked me. Wonderful little, probably 1 year old. So we're having a lot of fun over here at Wild Note with our new puppies. Nancy pretty much has a puppy in Joy.
Yes, indeed.
She's 2 years old now, but so big
I'm a
time.
true golden girl.
Yeah, dog lovers over here.
How many years until they can use Wild Note?
That's a good question.
How do you do this thing? Yeah. So we are so excited to have Bonnie Rogers here with us today. We got the pleasure of meeting her when we were able to attend a wetland training in Ojai. Nancy and I went for the day. I think it was a 2 day training. So we got the first day and really great teacher, awesome person. And so I will get to I'll just do it now. So Bonnie Rogers is a professional wetland scientist and certified coastal practitioner, serving as a leading regulatory specialist in Southern California. She guides a diverse clientele through complex environmental matters, specializing in Clean Water Act jurisdiction, compliance, and permit applications, while providing strategic recommendations. As a subject matter expert in California permitting and NEPA, Bonnie has led many multidisciplinary projects, including environmental impact statements and mitigation banks. Her diverse background includes roles as a Region 9 U.S. Environmental Protection Agency enforcement officer, a Los Angeles District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers senior project manager, National Marine Fisheries Service Scientist 3, and an instructor for the Wetland Training Institute, which is where we met her. So Bonnie has had both as consulting and regulatory agency and teacher experience. So we are so excited to have you here, Bonnie.
And not only that, but she's also been on the side of having to get something permitted. So I think you covered all the bases for all of this. So
Mhm. So
Thank
thanks.
you, Kristen. Yeah, thanks for having me and thanks for inviting me. I would just say quickly, it was super fun to have you all out in the field with us, getting into the dirt and digging soil pits, and that was a blast.
and
That was
Kristen's my favorite, learning how to make the soil ribbons.
oh yeah, soil ribbons for the win. So just a little I put down kind of a little organizing note here. We're gonna Bonnie is gonna touch on kind of a timeline, lot going on lately. So she's gonna get into that and then get into continuous surface connection and then some wonderful practitioner notes on ephemeral, intermittent, and perennial, which relates to question 7. Don't forget to answer it. Okay, Bonnie, let's share your screen now.
So far, 47% perennial. Intermittent is second, ephemeral is third in our list.
Okay, okay, that's what I was wondering.
Everyone wants to run all the time. All
I
right.
think you have to stop sharing, Kristen, I
Yep,
believe.
I do. You're right. There we
Okay.
go.
And let me know when you can see that PowerPoint.
I just see you right now.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you see, Nance?
No, we're not sharing yet. So go ahead and do your share button again, Bonnie. There we go.
Here we go.
Coming on now.
All right. How about
Here
All
we
that?
go.
right, we're there. Looking good.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Wow, big crowd. I know waters of the U.S. is a really popular topic, so I'm never surprised. And I love being in forums where we get to share information with each other, talk about what's going on and what might be ahead. Again, I'm Bonnie Rogers. My experience is at both federal agencies as well as environmental consulting firms. So yes, I've had the chance to sort of work on both sides, if you will, and it is really helpful and insightful to have that background. And I love sharing that with others. So I love working in waters. Not everyone does, but I absolutely love delineation work.
Right on.
Okay, so there's a lot of changes affecting federal agencies right now, and we've seen a lot come out since January 2025 and a lot before that too, right? So this slide, I want to go over just things to be aware of. There's links here too. We'll share that afterwards so you can read up more if one of these items is really relevant to a project you're working on. Not all of these changes are specific to waters or waters of the US per se, but they do affect the federal regulatory programs and projects as a whole. So in January, we saw an EO, an executive order, come out unleashing American energy. The goal here is to boost domestic energy production, but it also really focuses on reducing regulatory burdens and pausing funds from the Inflation Reduction Act for renewable energy projects. So this one, you might see this affecting your renewable energy projects already, or if you will be working on one, be aware of that. Second was in January was a national energy emergency declaration. So this is using an executive order to declare an emergency and asking the federal agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers to use their existing procedures like general permits, GPs, to facilitate energy supply, essentially. It also asks the agencies to expedite consultations. So from the agency side, we don't really know what that looks like. Expediting consultations could be difficult for complex projects or result in delays anyway in order to get through that process with the staff and resources that the agencies have right now. Another one, executive order coming out about reducing the workforce. So, how many federal staff are available to process our requests? It's looking like, we already know there's a reduction in the workforce, estimated at 7 to 12%, but under the 2026 budget coming up next year, we know that there'll be additional reduction in staff at the federal agencies. And at least this one, there's already current litigation out there on this, so it's kind of unclear what's ahead in the way of staff numbers to support our work.
Mm-hmm.
Specific to waters, in March, we saw the Army Corps and EPA come out with a memo clarifying adjacent wetlands and continuous surface connection. So this is narrowing federal wetlands, and this is a result of the Sackett case. So that's instrumental in our jurisdiction and our delineations right now.
Quick timeout. Can we have someone saying that they can only see the green hills in the background?
How about everyone else?
Yes. Can anyone else chime in on that? Feel free to toss it into the question and answer in the chat. I'm seeing the slides. Everyone's seeing the slides. So it looks like the person just seeing the green hills might need to expand something on their Zoom. All right, carry on, Bonnie. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. That might be my desktop background, so you might just need to rejoin. All right, so in March, we saw this memo, very instrumental to jurisdiction. The same day in March, get my arrows working. All right, try the button. We saw a posting in the Federal Register about seeking comment on the waters of the US. So definitions related to relatively permanent waters, seeking public comment. And that ended in April. They had their last public webinar on that.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing you might not realize is this Federal Register notice revokes prior executive orders from the Biden administration on climate change, science and technology, clean energy, etc. So that's a lot of changes in one notice there.
Right.
In April, we saw a presidential memorandum about updating permitting technology. So this directed the Council on Environmental Quality to establish an innovation center, which they have, and publish a permitting technology action plan. So that is available online at those links.
Nice.
And the language in there, it really talks about reducing, the environmental review process and really expediting that as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine for maybe complex projects that would reduce the thoroughness of reviews.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how that gets implemented.
Right.
Again, not waters related specifically, but changes to the Endangered Species Act, reducing the definition of harm. This plays a role in Section 7 consultations if your project has that. So it can change the scope and the timeline of your permitting. So it's really important and interrelated. Most recently in May, we just saw a Supreme Court decision from the 7 counties case. This is related to NEPA, and it specifically directs the agencies to narrow their study of environmental review. So again, going back to, for example, Army Corps permits, what is their NEPA scope of analysis for the project? That could, change on your projects depending on what resources you have at hand. And then a similar, prior 2024 Lopper Bright case related to NEPA. So a lot of changes here, right?
Please tell me there's not a second page of these.
And I'm so sorry to show you all this text, but these are references for you to follow. And it's just good to be generally aware of these different actions because they affect certain project types or, depending on what resources you have. So you really just need to have awareness so you can ask the right questions.
So Bonnie kindly put links to these. So when are we going to be able to share this?
Yeah, we'll share this out with the recording. That'll come out the beginning of next week.
Yeah, so then you can click on these links, which is great.
And then I just put up here because it came out on Monday, the nationwide permit program proposed reissuance with some changes. So be aware of that for any nationwide permits that might be changing up ahead in the next year as they work through that process. So agencies are navigating these substantial shifts, right? Let's not just think about ourselves, but these agencies and their long established programs, they are making a lot of internal changes in order to accommodate all of these variations to their programs. And that takes time. Okay, so that March 12th memo on continuous surface connection and adjacent wetlands, this memo says that adjacent wetlands are those that are physically abutting. On April 29th, EPA came out with training slides. Yay. We always love when there's some sort of guidance, right? And there's also pretty pictures. So they did a great job making this as clear as possible. If you're a wetland practitioner or ecologist, you know that there's not always a right line of where that wetland boundary edge is. So I would imagine there may be still some questions about whether a wetland is physically abutting or not, depending on the features that you have at hand and how clear it is. So check out those slides for sure if you're doing delineations and reports. Okay, common question, why are we expecting an upcoming Waters of the U.S. rule change? It's, I would say, not crystal clear. So if you dig into it, you can look to those March memos, the March memo and the Federal Register notice, and they talk about gathering information to inform future administrative action. So this is our clue here that, there's going to be an upcoming Waters rule change.
Right.
Another common question, right? This is probably what everyone wants to know, including myself. Will intermittent waters be jurisdictional? So, right now, if you're implementing the conforming rule, relatively permanent waters are jurisdictional. So it kind of depends on your tributary and whether most of it's ephemeral or most of it's intermittent. So there's still that gray area. And, we don't know what the next definition will be, but we can look around and take a guess based on the information we have at hand. So being back to the 2023 Sackett case, that case from the Supreme Court focused a lot on the prior 2006 Rapanos plurality, which is Justice Scalia's opinion that waters of the U.S. are only relatively permanent, standing or continuous flowing bodies of water, and wetlands are those with a continuous surface connection. So, this dates back to 2006 in, the discussions and opinion at that time as being presented, and it was focused heavily on in the Sackett case. So we just got that memo about adjacent wetlands. We might be expecting, a change to intermittent waters in the next rule coming up.
So Bonnie, that image of that map, all that red could potentially be unprotected.
Yeah, so this is a map from the USGS, and it represents ephemeral / intermittent streams in the arid Southwest.
Yeah.
In the arid West, over 66% of streams are intermittent. So that's the majority and most of the streams that we have at hand. So if we're looking at the future rule of only including, say, perennial waters, there's not going to be a lot of federally regulated features in the arid West.
Right.
And then we know that the Supreme Court is narrowing the jurisdiction of agencies through decisions that we've seen. And so I think, the word on the street is that intermittent waters may be cut back further. All right, practitioner field notes. So what do we do now in the near future between now and the next rule change? I'll say know your flow durations. What are these different flow durations in the fields by definition, by regulation? Ephemeral waters are those supported only by rain. Intermittent are supported by precipitation and groundwater. Perennial supported primarily by groundwater, right? That's the basis. In the regulations, though, right now under the conforming rule, ephemeral waters are almost always not jurisdictional. And I say that because if you have a long tributary that's mostly perennial and there's a small section that's ephemeral, that could maybe still be jurisdictional within the Strahler Stream Order Assessment. So setting that aside, you want to know the difference between your flow durations, right? We've been focusing a lot on the difference between ephemeral and intermittent because ephemeral are most of the time not jurisdictional at all. So trying to find that line. Coming up ahead, we'll also want to know more about the difference between intermittent and perennial, thinking ahead that maybe more perennial features are going to be jurisdictional and intermittent less. So we have tools available, stream bed duration assessment method across the 10 regions. In the arid West here, because I sit in Los Angeles, Southern California, the SDAM arid West was finalized last October, and they made substantial changes from the first version. And in order to get your result, you need to go online to the model calculator. So I just like to share that because not everyone knows that yet or has implemented SDAM.
Can you just give a quick description of that method?
Yeah, the stream bed duration assessment method was prepared by researchers who collected field data at different streams with different flow durations and correlate those stream flow durations with indicators in the field, like aquatic invertebrates, algae, hydrophytic vegetation. So it's a super fun method. I love it. You get to go out there and look for aquatic inverts, look for obligate and fact wet species. And then you plug in those indicators to the model and voila, you get a flow duration.
Do you have
So
an,
as long as you don't have problematic conditions, then you can just plug that in.
right? Do you have a favorite aquatic invert?
Well, I've been trying to get down the EPT names for a while. Ephemeroptera, Trichoptera, and Quadcoptera. So good luck with that. So this is a tool that's available. We don't know it's useful right now. Will it still be useful with a rule change? I'm not sure.
So this is not required, is that correct? Using this method, it's just encouraged to use the method in order to establish what kind of stream you have. Is that true?
Yeah, so any sort of like policy or guidance that's provided by an agency, it's not a regulation, so it's not quote required, but
Okay.
will it help you get a decision from the agency faster and more reliable? Yes. So if you have the time and budget or you're in the right phase of your project, I definitely suggest SDAM depending on how questionable your flow durations are.
So there's a question that came through chat. And by the way, folks, if you have questions, toss those into questions and answers, not chat if you don't mind. But what's the difference between relatively permanent and intermittent?
Oh, so I guess in general, right, relatively permanent waters are jurisdictional features under the current conforming rule. And then non-relatively permanent waters are not jurisdictional. Relatively permanent waters are those, with a flow duration, typically intermittent and perennial. So those would be your relatively permanent waters, generally speaking. And then your non-relatively permanent water would be your ephemeral feature. Now there's some variation in there. I kind of mentioned earlier, if you have a tributary and some of the flow duration changes, you'll need to assess that in context. So that makes a little bit of a gray area at times.
And then for California practitioners, there's a question, would the CRAM method be useful as an analysis alongside the SDAM?
I love CRAM. CRAM is a good rapid field method that tells you a lot about aquatic resources and streams, but it's not applicable for a jurisdictional basis. So it's not a method that you use to delineate waters, and it's not a method that you use to assess flow duration. And I'll just note that, for example, the definition of perennial in CRAM means flowing all year round, whereas at least for the last 25 plus years or under the Rapanos regime, perennial means flowing during the time that you have a winter season. So not necessarily every day of the year. So that nuance is important. And again, like the application of perennial is sort of changing and moving as we speak. So it's difficult to specifically say sometimes what an intermittent or perennial feature is. But yeah, CRAM you can use to assess like habitat quality or before and after changes. Great method.
And there's another question, if the stream is already established as one of the categories of streams, what's the use of conducting the SDAM?
If the stream's already established as having a certain flow duration, so if you're local to SoCal and the Los Angeles River or the Santa Ana River or the Pacific Ocean, those are traditional navigable waters. They're perennial waters. If you know that it's already a perennial water, then you might not have to apply SDAM. So it just depends what evidence you have at hand in order to feel you have a strong conclusion about your flow duration.
And is climate change changing that as well? Is it potentially that perennial streams could become intermittent or intermittent could become ephemeral?
I love when people ask this question. It gets asked a lot in the field. It's a very insightful question, right? Do we have sort of like a shifting baseline where things are getting drier over time? And I will say that is an excellent question.
Of which you are not qualified to answer? Is that what you're implying?
I would say in practice in the field, we're trying to look at whether a wetland or stream traditionally is about 50% of the time that has that characteristic or not. And so, if the trend is that a stream is getting drier or flow duration has changed and you're documenting that trend, that is typically how we delineate, right? So we use the data that we have available to us.
Thank you.
Okay, so perfect. Document your delineated features well and provide a rationale, right? This isn't just SDAM or, I don't really like when people use flow duration from NWI because we don't know how it was derived. Provide whatever data you have available to support why you think it's a certain flow duration. And, I just want to stress documenting delineated features because if the regulations change, if you have all the data you need, it's going to be a lot easier to just redefine those in your report.
So give an example of like how you could really protect yourself by documenting correctly the delineated features versus like not. You know what I mean, Bonnie?
Yeah, because ephemeral waters are generally not jurisdictional, but they have, for example, an ordinary watermark, right?
Yeah.
They're visible on maybe even an aerial or in the field. It looks like a stream, but by definition in the regulations, it isn't. And so to avoid confusion and questions and discussion, you should document that feature that you're calling not jurisdictional, rather than just leaving it out because it's not jurisdictional.
I see.
And after talking all about federal waters of the U.S., don't forget some states we have surface waters of the state. So, we do in California here and many other states, although the level of protection varies, the type of streams and wetlands can vary. But this just goes to show that you probably need to document all those features anyway to consider state jurisdiction.
That kind of lends nicely to a question, kind of statement from Jeffrey Elliott. What is the new acronym for waters of the state? WOTUS?
WOTS?
Is there one?
I'm not quite sure. There's been things change so fast. Is there a new acronym for that? I'm not sure.
Okay.
People traditionally use all sorts of different acronyms for waters of the state.
I see.
Yeah, I've seen lots of different variations.
Matthew Allen also chimed in that Louisiana just changed their definition of waters of the state to match Sackett. So that's what's happening in Louisiana.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's good to get a pulse on what's going on around the country and whether it's specific to that state or a common trend. It's really good to stay connected and networked. Okay, so all these changes, you're joining this webinar. Awesome, trying to keep up on everything. Now, what kind of things can we do to adapt to all this uncertainty? So boom, stay updated. That's you. You're doing that already. Things are coming out a lot, monthly essentially. So making sure that your reports are relevant and speaking to the right rules and regulations. Keeping up to date on state regs. So this kind of goes more into staying connected with your agency staff to make sure you're not missing anything. So if you have an application in or you're in communication with them, ask questions and see if they know. Having said that, the Army Corps districts and the local offices for the federal agencies, they have to hear from headquarters before they can start implementing something different. So even if you've heard about some decision higher up, the districts can't implement that until they've been given explicit direction. So if it seems slow, yes, it might be slow, but you'll have to wait. Okay, proactive strategies. I put this one on here again, thorough delineation, because it's super important. Allows you to pivot, not get confused, right? You have one feature that's labeled 2 different jurisdictions, state, federal. It can be confusing to map these features when you have a lot of features. Adapt your project design. So this is proactive, right? Get in there early to help during the design phase, because the designers might not realize avoiding impacts can dramatically change the success and speed of the project. So really important to get in there and look at those baseline data first. Engage experts early. I think we've always said this, right? But it's still relevant with changes to NEPA and scope of analysis. Talk to experts, whether that's your internal network or reaching out to others within your firm, for example. This one's coming up a lot. Everybody wants an approved jurisdictional determination, right? That should say determination there. Everyone wants an AJD because that's your ticket from the agency. I did my delineation. Here's my jurisdiction. It's final. But the agencies, they're short-staffed. They've been overwhelmed with AJDs since the original litigation began with Sackett. And so the agencies right now, or the Army Corps, let's say, they want you to submit your AJD concurrent with your permit application. So it's great you're trying to get in there early to establish jurisdiction, but if you're going to get any sort of early concurrence from the Army Corps on jurisdiction, it should be informal because they likely will take a long time to process an AJD.
So maybe that was a strategy that helped for expediting things in the past, Bonnie, and maybe not anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you could, there's never really been a good timeline for AJDs. They could have taken a year, or they've always been low priority. But we saw that change a little bit. And then folks were submitting AJDs because they were confused, right, about what the jurisdiction is and wanted that confirmation from the agency.
Right.
But they've kind of pulled back from AJDs just because of workload. So standalone AJDs can be difficult to get from the Corps.
Okay.
But talk to your project manager. There's concurrence letters, there's informal review.
With the tightening of the definition of WOTUS, would you suspect that would change eventually if with staffing changes, that it should go faster theoretically because there's less? Am I thinking about it wrong? There's not really less things to consider. Like there's a certain group that you can just eliminate in terms of something being jurisdictional or not. Does my question make sense?
Yeah, Yeah, it makes sense, right? So if we have less jurisdiction, the presumption is perhaps lower workload and more time to work on additional actions. I don't know what that looks like yet. Right now, it's a lot on the agencies with all of these regulatory changes, and we don't see that really overall slowing down right now because of all the litigation. So things might change again, but it's quite possible if federal jurisdiction gets very narrow that eventually there might be some additional time for more AJDs. It's hard to say. Less staff, that won't help.
There's one of our questions was in general, how are the new regulations impacting permitting for your projects? And the choices were permit process is faster, slower, or too soon to tell. 81% too soon to tell. And 3% the process has been faster for them. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of that, because there's less interest in scrutinizing, let's say, certain general permits or certain project types. They may simply, be moving a little bit faster. But don't forget to think about whether you feel confident about your permit decisions for your project risk. So perfect segue. Risk-based decision making, right? There's no one size fits all for what's the best permit pathway, or we did it on this project, why won't it work on this other project? Well, you really need to think about all the risks involved, right? The resources, who's the lead agency, who's reviewing and finalizing NEPA, what process do they have internally, what type of pressures are they getting from the White House or other entities? Is the project controversial? So every project's different, and also every client's different, right? I always give recommendations to my client. At the end of the day, it's their decision if they want us to, for example, submit an approved JD and coordinate that before moving into permitting. But that could take a year to get an AJD. So are they willing to wait, or is that a risk that they want to avoid, so they're willing to wait? Project schedule and life cycle, same thing, right? Are you trying to get a permit now in the next year, like a nationwide? Well, the things you think about may be a little bit different than if you're on a 6-year planning project, right? You're not going to submit your permit applications for 5 or 6 years from now. Who knows what the regulatory environment looks like at that time. So you wouldn't want to think about your project only in context of current regulations if they might be different later. And yeah.
I was going to chime in. Ben Rumi says processing time for an AJD often exceeds a permit application, especially nationwide permits. Many project timelines benefit from assuming features are jurisdictional and going straight to permitting.
Yeah, so that's how the core regulatory program traditionally worked, right? If the applicant wanted to assume jurisdiction of all the features, then go ahead, assume jurisdiction. Even if there's impacts, you have to mitigate, you get your permit. But now EPA and the Corps have to be more careful about taking jurisdiction over features that are clearly not jurisdictional, like ephemeral waters or wetlands that are not adjacent wetlands. So they don't want to be issuing a permit for things they have no authority over. So that environment has changed a little bit, where you can't just say, hey, we'll accept jurisdiction of everything.
Mm-hmm. Right.
This last one, probably my favorite, plan to do more. As there's less staff and there's a lot of agency program changes, plan to get savvy yourself and try to help the regulator if you want to get that permit for your project. Ask them, can I draft that public notice? Or how can I change this map so that it will be conveyed to your leadership most clearly so that they simply accept it on first review? So yeah, plan to do more for our federal partners and state partners. All right, so I'd like to hear more. How are you adjusting to regulatory uncertainty? Do you have things that are working well? I would love to know. Like, do you have an example out there where something's worked great in your district or the office you're working with?
Well, people ponder that and maybe put that into our chat. There's two other questions.
Okay.
Ellen Mullen says, can you expand on the values of concurrence or informal JDs? Feels like some clients want to hold a USACE letter, but practice seems to vary by district.
Yeah, I have seen that as well. So the districts have always considered their region and their regional conditions and environment and features, their flow duration types, their rivers, their politics. They've always considered what's in their region to make program changes or program implementation. So yes, I've also seen the district use delineation concurrence letters differently and at different, levels or frequency. But I do understand that, project managers, some really like that option because it's not a PJD, it's not an AJD, it's just, hey, we reviewed your delineation and we agree, or here's some changes I would make. Earlier when I used the word informal, I meant just that, like talking to your regulator. So no concurrence letter, no PJD, no AJD, just, hey, could you look at this map and let me know if you have any thoughts?
Linda Mavi asks, as regulations shift over time, how long will the delineation hold as valid?
That's a great question. So traditionally, during the Rapanos regime, approved JDs were valid for about 5 years unless conditions had changed, and then you would need to update it. During the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, we saw a memo from EPA and the Corps indicating that certain AJDs may need to be revisited. So how long your AJD will be valid will depend on the guidance that comes out from the agency at the time of a rule change.
Interesting.
Gary Brown shared in the chat, the Charleston district has said that still assuming all features are jurisdictional is the fastest way to move forward with projects and getting a permit. So if you're in the Charleston district, that's the word there. Cindy Paschke says Ohio districts are not required to submit AJDs for USCPA 21-day review. PMs finalize after they complete their paperwork. And Gary Hotker says, note on the, I don't know what these acronyms mean, SWRCB/RWQCB will often require an AJD before they will agree to proceed with the waste discharge requirement permit process for non-federal waters of the state.
Yeah, so I think that comment speaks to the state. Like, for example, I'm in California, the California State Water Quality Control Board. I've seen them ask for a letter or AJD from the Army Corps regarding federal jurisdiction. And that is, a typical process for them. It's in their waters procedures for wetlands permitting and discharges. So if there is a Corps letter or AJD, then the state can use that in reference to federal waters. If the state's asking for one and you don't have one from the Corps, I would tell them, we don't have one. we're not pursuing an approved JD. And so we'll need to move forward with that one. And I have seen pushback on that, but you're not required to get an AJD from the Corps.
So Linda's just trying it. Did you just answer just by the duration of the AJD or also the duration of the jurisdictional delineation?
Oh, I was answering the question related to how long an approved JD is good for, typically 5 years unless conditions have changed.
Okay.
A delineation, right? If you didn't get an HAD, but you conducted a delineation, typically that data is generally valid for about 2 years, or unless conditions have changed.
Okay.
So, after 2 years, I recommend that you revisit your site and confirm those features or make adjustments if relevant.
Okay. I like this comment from Edward Bolenbaugh. The plan to do more. This is an incredible time for individuals, companies, and industries to really step up and start driving these processes, setting baselines that are positive and promote forward thinking regardless of administrations or policies.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And we'll be the ones to remain through all this, right?
Yeah, we have to survive it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say on that note, policy often comes from industry. So you might not think of it that way because the agencies also have their own policies. But if an industry, for example, housing developers, right? If they're consistently doing some sort of similar practice that works for both them and the agency and the permit process, then that will be something the industry and the agencies are familiar with and sort of loosely expect from a policy perspective. So, you can influence the programs and permitting by implementing voluntary measures in your project.
Mm. Let's get to your wish list, Bonnie.
This is my little sign. You got this. It's a lot to keep up with. I have a hard time keeping up with it. And thank goodness I have all sorts of other colleagues who help me with that too. So everyone's working really hard to stay up to date and try to be strategic and smart for our projects.
Totally.
My wish list. So you guys asked me to make a wish list, and so I tried to think of like my top 3 things that will help you, help the agencies, use tools to present information clearly, right? Less staff, less time. Things are confusing. Be very clear when you present your maps, tables. Try not to submit super long documents. Avoid impacts, right? This just improves certainty. If you can avoid impacts, you're looking at a lot less potential regulatory permitting, amount of time in the permit process, even compensatory mitigation, litigation, whether state or federal. So I would say plan to avoid impacts where possible. And then lastly, our regulators are working really hard, right? I'm a former regulator. I worked with an incredible group of people, both within my agencies that I worked at, as well as, interagency. And it's truly an amazing set of staff, and they're going through a lot too. So I would just say, be aware they're working hard, work with them, ask questions, and we can get through some of this together.
So we do a lot of these webinars, and a common message: be nice to your regulators.
Yeah. Just be nice. Just be nice.
That's great. It's a good thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
And by the way, I just want to say, before we wrap up here, it's now almost a tie between intermittent and perennial. We're at 35. We're at 44% intermittent and 45% perennial. So
let's look at the poll answers. as we wrap up here, what are the answers to the other questions?
I don't have them all because I have most of our people on this call are either wetland scientists, biologists, or project managers. That's the bulk of the folks on our call today.
Okay.
In general, we talked about permit process. Is it fast or slow or too soon to tell? It's definitely too soon to tell for most people. Has your level of field work changed on your projects? 20% say it's increased, 16% say it's decreased, and 64% say it stayed the same. So most people doing the same amount of field work regardless of the changes in our policies right now. And then we had some long answers that I don't have access to from here.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so thanks for filling that out, but we'll share that information too. That'll go out for
And
everyone.
I'll share my screen as we wrap up here. If you want to stop sharing yours, Bonnie.
I
There
think
you are.
I think I'm going to have to remember anytime we have someone like Bonnie on that it's going to be an hour webinar. So it's just false advertising to say 30 minutes. There's too much good
I
information.
know we should
Everybody.
just change it to at
Yeah.
least 45, but
Yeah.
so
Wow, everybody stayed on. That's so great.
I know,
Yeah.
right? So we tic-tac-toe it here. We do we like to do an informational high value webinar with an expert, and then we like to do a webinar that focuses on new features and great things inside our platform. So if you're interested in learning more about WildNote, this is a perfect opportunity to come. We can also do an AMA, which is Ask Me Anything, right?
Yeah.
So anything you want to know about WildNote. We just implemented such a cool feature. We have repeaters within our surveys. So like if you're doing a delineation, each veg strata, you'd have different repeaters for the plants. And this won't be so great for wetland, but for transect work, you can now copy a repeater. So if you're going from one point to another and the plants are very similar, you can now copy that repeater data and then just edit. And so that will provide a lot more field efficiency for you out there while you're collecting data, which I know we all want. So really excited about that feature coming out, and hope to see you August 20th. And Bonnie, you're a rock star. Thank you so much for making it today and sharing your expertise with us.
And thank you to all the biologists and wetland scientists and everybody on the call today for all of your hard work too out there. So we appreciate that. And thanks for hanging on a little longer than our proclaimed 30 minutes.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.